this is one of Sam and my first virtual conference this year, so we're getting used to it. The format is great. It's actually pretty engaging. You get to see a whole bunch of different folks in different formats, so it's been a lot of fun. But maybe I'll start with introductions here. So the two of us are here on a panel. It's more of a fireside chat, so balancing customer experiences versus inventory at risk. So maybe just quick introductions first. My name is Noah Yago. I've been a venture capitalist for a decade and a half at this point. I currently am on Cisco's investment team, and I am responsible for leading the charge with investments around data and analytics and cloud, which neither of which really have much to do with marketplaces. But over the course of my career, I have invested in a number of marketplace businesses. And GetAround is probably one of the more interesting stories and companies that I've been involved with. And GetAround CEO is Sam, who I'll let him introduce himself. And just for full disclosure, I joined the GetAround story during its Series B, I guess about 6 years ago now. That's when Sam and I and the founding team first got to know each other. And I am currently on GetAround's board of directors. So Sam.
Okay, thank you, Noah. So yeah, once again, I'm Sam Zaid, one of the founders, CEO at GetAround. I guess much like Noah, I've been in the startup game for a decade and a half. Started out my career something more relevant to what Noah does today, which is cloud and big data and AI. So a bit more on the enterprise side of things, and really gravitated over to consumer with GetAround, which is a company that I co-founded and we launched in 2011, and really is a marketplace for those who don't know, marketplace that enables anyone to rent out their car to somebody else. And we make that process simple and easy, so you can download our app, literally sign up and rent a car in a matter of minutes, find the car, unlock the doors from your phone and drive away. All of that through a combination of hardware and software technology that we have developed ourselves. Maybe a little bit more about the company. Today we're available in the US and Europe, 300 cities, and roughly about 100,000 cars on the platform. So Noah, why don't I turn it back to you and fire away with questions.
There we go. Well, Sam, when you and I first met 6 years ago, the business was very different than it is today. And I imagine just at the beginning of the journey, when you first started the company, one of the interesting things to think about from a perspective of a company like yours is you have a number of different constituents. And as a platform, you probably had to make some decisions about who your key constituent was and how you balance the interest between all of those, which probably ultimately translated into what kind of a marketplace you wanted to build. So maybe just to get things going, when you first started the company, did you have a pretty clear vision of who your key constituents were and what type of a marketplace you wanted to build, or how's that evolved?
Yeah. I mean, the short answer is probably not really. I mean, we had a hypothesis on who our key constituents would be and what our core audiences would be on the platform, which was very much a consumer-to-consumer marketplace, which is still true today. I think what changed was really the aspects of the marketplace, and to the title was really like what did we leave the seller and buyer, or in our case the owner and renter, to take on and handle themselves, and what did we actually end up taking on as a platform. So a little bit more on that. I mean, when we launched in 2011, we followed more of a eBay or Airbnb model. We were truly just a marketplace connecting the seller and buyer, and they, or renter and owner in our case, and they really handled everything. So everything was coordinated peer-to-peer between those two parties, including approving the booking request, picking up the car, coordinating getting the keys, and things like that. What we learned very quickly and early on was that for our use case, for someone wanting to rent a car often, maybe multiple times a week, it introduced just too much friction, all that overhead. And so in order to improve and simplify the customer experience, we actually decided strategically to shift certain functions off the marketplace, and in the sense of like off the constituents or the owner and renter onto the platform and take responsibility for those, and obviously in the process take the risk associated with them. So initially this was things like vetting drivers, so identity and payment fraud checks, as well as equipping every car with GetAround Connect, which is our hardware software connected car stack we developed, so that you could locate the car, pick up the car, and unlock the doors all from your phone. And so in doing that, obviously, then we were taking on more responsibility on the marketplace, and in fact, learned a lot about when we should be leveraging the different parties and when is better for the platform itself to take responsibility.
So as you think about that, there's probably a natural tendency as an entrepreneur, as a company that's building a platform, to see a lot of problems and pain points in the market and say, hey, we think we could actually make this smoother and make it more efficient and do it better. So they're probably, within the universe of different things you could do, a number of different directions. So how do you look at all of those holistically and just decide which ones are worth taking on and which ones are probably riskier and which ones provide benefits?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard and very challenging, obviously, to really know until you try. So I guess a couple things that we've tried to adopt as a philosophy. So one was, on a marketplace, we used to look at lifetime value independently on either side, right? So what's the lifetime value of the supplier? What's the lifetime of the demand? And what we realized is that in optimizing those independently, you could decide to take on something that improves the customer experience on one side, but actually is a net negative to the other side. And so one of the things we've tried to really hone in on is, how do we optimize system LTV? So really thinking about the lifetime value and the long term of not either side of the marketplace, but the unit of combined system, which for us, for instance, is, say, one car and a group of renters, maybe, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, it varies by market, but call it 20 renters, right? And so the idea that you're thinking about what would be increasing the lifetime value of the system versus one side or the other is a helpful, I guess, barometer in terms of prioritizing those. And then early on, the ones I mentioned around like vetting and developing the connected car technology, those are relatively obvious early on. But the challenge is, anytime the marketplace takes responsibility, you essentially decouple the seller from the buyer, and so you can improve customer experience, but you're also potentially, and by removing friction, but you're also potentially introducing opaqueness, right? And so in the process of introducing opaqueness, you can then reintroduce other types of customer frustration and other challenges. For instance, if we say that, hey, we don't believe this user is trustworthy because we think they're using a stolen credit card, we can't go and turn around and tell the car owner, oh, here's the credit card we think is stolen, right? There's a lot of privacy and personal information. And so they might say, no, I know that person, they're not fraudulent. And it's like, creates that, if it were peer-to-peer, they could make their own decision. But because we've taken it, now you're creating a trust challenge, which you have to do. You basically have to elevate the bar high enough that the net effect on the marketplace is positive, which means you really, really have to invest on anything you try to do to get at that level of quality and accuracy. Otherwise, you tend to get the blame even when it's not necessarily your fault.
Well, that's probably a good point, because in certain choices that you make just around product and different offerings, you're taking on a lot of responsibility to both sides. So I think we were chatting about this before. You used the example of Uber, where if you have a complaint about your driver, you're not reaching out to the driver ultimately, but you're reaching out to Uber. So there are probably different ways that you need to set the business up to accommodate those choices.
Yeah, and that's actually something we learned and actually progressively undid, which was, there was a trend, I think, when you talked about food delivery. So, Postmates or DoorDash or Uber Eats, and rideshare, so Uber and Lyft, where the tendency was to truly sort of decouple the marketplace, so that the platform was right in the middle. And so, like, if I order a pizza and I don't like the pizza, I don't complain to the restaurant. I complain to Postmates, for instance. They solve the problem with me, and then they ostensibly go and solve the problem with the restaurant. And so they're sort of sitting right in between. And I have no idea what deal is they cut with the restaurant, right? All I know is my issue is resolved because it's completely decoupled. And so that was sort of all the rage, because obviously it creates a very seamless experience because you can just like control everything and create the least amount of friction. The challenges we learned as we tried to approximate that in different areas was that really works well for things that are commodities, where there's not a ton of variability, and food and just getting a ride is a pretty consistently similar. I mean, different types of food, but it's you understand what you're getting, and it's well understood, and it's both of those are really commoditized marketplaces, which transportation and renting a car sort of is in certain use cases, but a lot of the time what we found is there's a lot more complexity.
Right. So someone who's going to rent a smart car is going to be looking for a different experience than someone who's going to want to rent a Tesla, for example.
Yeah, and some people are looking for different things like child seat or dog friendly, or there's just, they have a certain preference, affinity for a brand. They want a faster car, a compact car, whatever makes them feel most comfortable with parallel parking. And so there's so many things that when you try to stand in between something that's not so commoditized and is more differentiated, then it's very hard to do that well.
I remember a conversation we had at the board level just about thinking in terms of pricing as a feature, and just how you manage that as one example of something that we could take on as a platform, or you could put in the hands of the owners and the renters. And we ultimately got to the decision where we wanted to approach it in a way where we had some control over it. So, and that seemed to be a good experiment.
Yeah, I mean, that was one where I think we obviously saw challenges with people pricing stuff individually, because how do you know how to price your car, right? I mean, you have a gut feel, but at the end of the day, again, it's not a commodity. So there's so many things that are variable, that where the car is located, the condition of the car, age of the car, type of car, the demand around it, the time of day, the day of week, whether there's an event going on, not that happens these days, but it's a holiday, or a long weekend. And so that was one where we felt that putting that on the platform, we could actually augment and do a better job for everybody. And the big one there is when you look at and we did a lot of research into revenue management, pricing yield on marketplaces. And the big thing you want to always prevent is actually value erosion on a marketplace, right? And when the pricing is set by the individuals, you're very tempted to say, oh, I have a Prius, my neighbor has a Prius, let me price 1 penny below my neighbor. And then you sort of have this race down where everybody is just trying to get, is doing what they should do, which is they're gaming the market to try and get the most demand. But in the process, they're actually eroding value for the product. So we really felt that it was important to, in our what we call predictive pricing, protect for value erosion, and then also add the dynamic pricing element that leverage sort of all the signals and increasing number of signals that we were collecting as we got more scale and more data.
So that one worked out well. What about examples of features that we took on that maybe didn't work out as well?
Yeah. Yeah. And so probably the one that still very passionate about, but I don't believe we approached the correct way, was cleaning, right? So if you think about cleaning, everybody wants a clean car. It's pretty clear that it's a value add to the marketplace. Nobody on the supply side wants to clean their car regularly. Some people do, maybe more OCD and stuff, but generally it's work. And then you've got the demand side who, very clearly in the data value a clean car. And so we thought, okay, great. This is an opportunity for us to leverage our technology, all of the data we have about a car, because we know, hey, where the car's parked, how to get into it, to work with, a vendor or multiple vendors to offer, a really sort of on-demand cleaning service or a cleaning subscription service. And this is a good example where we did this thing where, again, we tried to decouple. And so we sort of stood in the middle between the vendor and the owner of the car and said, okay, we're going to manage the vendor's service delivery and then the expectations of the owner, because we felt that was the way to deliver the most controlled and customer experience and higher quality customer experience. And again, actually what we learned in that case was the opaqueness was just too problematic, right? So we ended up being the guys blamed if the cleaning wasn't done well, or if the cleaning wasn't done on time, or if there were challenges related to the car itself. And so as a consequence of that, we realized that again was not that sort of introducing that managed functionality into the marketplace was too high risk relative to the customer experience gain we got, unless we were to really essentially build the service ourselves. So we'd have to have more control over the operations, more control over the service delivery, in which case then it's like, okay, is that what we want to be doing as a company relative to all the other things we could be working on? It's not to say there isn't another mechanism for doing it, and we have thought about that, but it was really a lesson we felt sort of got into this idea of like, hey, you know what, if you're trying to create a marketplace where you're managing that between both sides of supply and demand for cleaning, that essentially is a whole business and a whole marketplace, and it needs that level of attention. And so that did not work as well, and we ultimately rolled it back.
Right. And then just as a business leader and someone who's building a platform, just thinking about all the puts and takes for all these different features, it's got to be complex in a home market like San Francisco. And then it probably takes on an additional layer of complexity when you expand both nationally, knowing that markets like Los Angeles just operate very differently in terms of how people own cars and how they use it, in places like the East Coast where you have winter, which we fortunately or unfortunately don't really have here in San Francisco. And then of course, when you go internationally, right? So we as a company expanded pretty significantly over the last year and took on a lot of operations in Europe. So I would imagine that the considerations and the thought process that go into these, just balancing customer experience versus inventory risk, is additionally complex.
And we only ever rolled out cleaning in a small number of markets, and that's on the West Coast we tend to forget there's this thing called winter and snow and and ice and salt, and cleaning is a whole different beast when you're in that environment. And it's exactly right. That creates yet another level of complexity in terms of the service delivery, and the more you have uncoupled it and taken on that risk, then again, gets to my point. You're really starting to think about how do I treat this as a whole business unit because of all of those components and complexity. That's in our business, particularly where obviously there is local complexity. So, we find differences in LA versus San Francisco. In LA, people rent cars for longer, right? The average trip is twice as long. That also changes when you can clean a car and how often the car is going to be parked at home to go and clean it. So even simple things like that, then the distance you have to drive change the operations to the point that you're almost better off having a different sort of relationship with the cleaning ecosystem that actually varies by market, but doesn't put the marketplace brand in between it as the brand taking the risk for the service delivery.
And then of course, with our business, technology is such an important part of the way that we built our platform. And I'd imagine a lot of these decisions really are very, very closely linked with how we deploy the technology and the capability it has versus other businesses where you might take less of a technology-oriented approach, and that has impacts just across the board.
Yeah, obviously we invest very heavily in our connected car stack, and we have a lot of capabilities there, an increasing number of capabilities there, which open up really interesting and tempting opportunities to deliver better customer experience. And I think that the discipline that we just spoke about is what has helped us really understand and learn. Okay, as much as those are real, those are opportunities, and there's tons of them, from insurance to cleaning to servicing across the board. There's an open ecosystem of automotive services that could and should and will be disrupted by technology. And so it's very tempting when you're there, but I think the lessons we've learned around balancing being a marketplace and not trying to take on more than that, and doing that really well, and then being very selective where we go deep in that marketplace, has helped us. I think in some of the lessons learned, has certainly helped us, figure out how to align around the thinking of what the marketplace should be doing and what we should not be doing, when to use the nature of the suppliers and buyers or owners and renters, and when when to really think that the marketplace can 10x something. And I think that's the other constraint is whatever we want to do, we want to be able to do it 10x better. And if we can't do it 10x better, then just letting the market dynamics play out and the free market play out, then we don't, today we wouldn't consider it.
So look at system-wide LTV when you think about trade-offs between different features that you might put on the marketplace. Think about how to balance the puts and takes with ownership of a certain system versus creating friction, and just asking yourself the question is, can we do something better and more efficiently than already exists in the market? And if not, maybe let someone else do it. And if so, maybe it's a good value add for the overall marketplace.
Yeah, and I think that's good. And then also thinking of the system, like every marketplace is a system, right? Because you need the supply and demand. I think I answered the chicken and egg poll earlier. And so, it was really like optimizing for system LTV versus customer LTV when you have 2 customers or 3 customers is an important distinction to think about, because it's really easy to push for one side of the marketplace and forget the other. And actually you're creating an imbalance and it may not be the right choice to make.
All right, so you mentioned the poll over here, and looks like we're getting a time check, and it's a good time to enter into Q&A with the remaining time that we have here.
Yeah,
so I will throw out a couple questions that are coming up in the chat over here. So number one, timely question, pros and cons with respect to the business that have emerged from coronavirus.
Yeah, so that's a long question that specifically references hertz and other things. Our belief is actually so the sentiment we've seen coming out of places that have recovered from coronavirus, like China, is roughly an 80% increase in car share, both in consumer interest and actually in transaction volume. So we actually think there's strong tailwinds for car share. And there are certain features we're in the middle of developing and shipping that are really tailored towards that contactless experience and car share being a very social distancing friendly product. And so we see that as actually COVID as actually being quite a strong tailwind, and specifically for GetAround because it's always been contactless, right? Because of the technology in every car and GetAround Connect in every car, you really can do everything from your phone. You don't have to go to someone's house, get the keys from them, they cough on you, next thing you know, you're in the hospital, right? So, you don't have that experience on the platform, which is relative to something like car rental, which is a much more, wait in a queue with a lot of people around, and you're, surrounded by folks in a very packed environment. We think will definitely will help with more consumer adoption of the product over the coming years.
Okay, yeah, like everyone else, I think we're trying to figure it out in real time, and we're very conscious of all the positives. Well, there aren't really any positives that come out of it other than maybe some opportunities for the business, but we're navigating it as best we can and taking all the data that we can to try to resolve that. Sam, next question I'll ask, because it comes up a lot around our business that is very much connected to high cost assets. So the question about insurance, and just thinking about how you think about insurance today versus maybe when you started the business.
Yeah, so that's another one that started when we started the business. We had a single partner basically handling almost all of our insurance. So it's very much a partner-driven outsourced component of the business. Obviously, we paid premium, but they handled claims and things like this. As we scaled, we got more involved in the claims and insurance process. And in fact, we engaged, I won't get into too much detail, a partner to run a lot of that for us. But we put ourselves again a little bit in front of it. And actually, we've since backpedaled to the original structure we've had on insurance, largely because we had that partner really not performing for a period of time, and we had to switch them out and bring in the partner we have today that's much, much better. And so that has changed over time to, again, really leverage the nature of the marketplace to not be something that we feel we have to be the experts at, but we have good expertise in, but work with the right partners. And then finally, the thing we're doing more and more today is shifting more control back to the car owners and to the renters, so that for a lot of the smaller stuff, there'll be an ability for them to just self-resolve issues quickly. Because again, even our partners, which everyone who's ever dealt with an insurance company, they're fast, but they're still could be faster, right? Could be better. And so empowering the marketplace is the other shift that we've done there.
Okay. This might help the audience. A couple of tactical questions. What sort of KPIs do you think about with inventory readiness?
Are we talking about vertically integrating supply or the KPIs for?
KPIs for inventory readiness. So I would imagine things like car availability, demand.
Yeah, so we look at a number of things. So we obviously look at exactly that. We look at obviously the unit of supply, which for us is really supply hours, and we look at availability of cars. Then we're looking at quality indicators on cars. So those can be coming from a number of places, our own data, from the users who are rating the experience, as well as data submitted by the owner. And more and more, we're actually thinking about structures in the whole life cycle of a transaction that actually factor in inventory readiness into part of the transaction, meaning that there actually is a quote unquote turnaround period for inventory that has certain constraints around it that allow for sort of a high degree of quality control between transactions. And it's something that's configurable, and I won't get into the details of it, but that's how we think about the inventory readiness side of it. And then obviously we look at this by geo and by category of car. Those are also very important to cut things on for our business, is location and a Tesla, again, not being the same as a Prius.
Location and probably some level of density too when you think about launching a new market, right?
Yeah. If we're talking about new markets, we are very focused on building local density rather than sort of spreading too broadly, too quickly.
Right. Okay. So I think we have a couple more minutes. I don't know if we are going to get cut off, but we'll just keep going. And I think these are great questions, and thanks everyone for participating.
Quickly on the initial inventory readiness, we just look at signals of the car. We actually do. We have in our case, we have a 42-point standard inspection that can be done by any one of our partner vendors. That gives us good information on the quality of capability of the vehicle.
There is one question in here about how the investors consider the investment in hardware. So maybe I can take that one. Yeah, look, I think every marketplace has a special sauce, and every company that is investing in both supply and demand. Oh, we have the session till 1 p.m. All right, great. Really, they're pretty unique. I think you're trying to balance a lot of different interests from a lot of different types of folks. And when we originally joined the GetAround Syndicate 6 years ago, as I mentioned, hardware was actually a pretty important piece of the puzzle. Our view of the market was that you created a level of differentiation by investing in hardware, and the experience, at least from a peer-to-peer car sharing perspective, is really, really hard to get right. And we saw it a number of times with OEMs who are launching different products, and it was hard to get it to the point where you could be a renter, unlock your car with minimal friction. So for us, we saw that as a key investment, really to grow the business and as a value add. I have seen in different marketplaces, there's always a question about that. And there's a narrative in the venture world today that hardware might be less attractive than other businesses just because of the upfront investment and capital costs. I think in my view, at least, in the view of at least a lot of my peers, is you really need to look at what the holistic business is. And at least in this case, hardware was very much a piece of the puzzle, and it was driving value, but it wasn't necessarily the core of the business model in terms of generating revenue, and that really came from the liquidity in the marketplace. So Sam, I don't know if we shared that when we made the investment, but that was part of our.
Nothing to add. I guess you read your investment memo prior to this session.
There we go. All right, Sam, I imagine you're a pretty big consumer of GetAround as well. That's actually how I first became aware of the company. I was renting a car after moving back to San Francisco, and it just seemed like a really elegant business. And I reached out to you, and here we are years later, and many different iterations of the company later. If you're not using GetAround, what do you use for your own personal transportation?
Yeah, well, I do use GetAround quite often, but if I'm not using GetAround for sort of like last mile or short trip, I'm typically on my boosted electric skateboard. Big fan of the company, which obviously is not around today anymore, but which is saddening for me because I've been a long-time customer. But that's yeah, I ride my boosted Stealth or my boosted Rev.
All right, so if you see somebody riding around San Francisco on a boosted skateboard, motorized skateboard, it might be Sam. You can
Yeah,
probably ask him more questions if he hasn't answered all of them during this session.
yeah, yeah. Works for me. If you can catch me on my boosted, I'm game.
Well, all right, everyone. I think we're just about out of time, but really appreciate all of you taking the time to hear us out, and hopefully you found it informative.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate the attention you paid to this, and it was a great first virtual conference for me. So hopefully it was clear and worked out for you guys, and for all the entrepreneurs and founders out there, good luck with your business. I know it's tough and always hard, but hang in there. There's a lot of opportunity on the other side of it. So.